Good evening. Welcome to the January 16th, 2024 meeting of the Genoa Township Zoning Commission. It is 7 p.m. We're in the Township Hall. Agenda items this evening, zoning case 2023-06, Multi-Sound Studios, which is our second meeting, the potential zoning resolution amendments. Staff present this evening, Joe Schaefer, the Director of Development Zoning. Roll call, Mr. Schaefer.
Roll call, Mr. Bernert.
Present.
Mr. Carter.
Present.
Mr. Leff.
Here.
Ms. Walsh.
Present.
Mr. Welch.
Here.
And I will note that both of our alternates, Mr. Wester and Mr. Sears, are also here.
Our statement of policy, this meeting may be recorded. Such recordings are public record and may be posted online and could be subject to review in court. As is the adopted policy of the Zoning Commission, all applicants will be granted an opportunity to make their formal presentation. The audience may be granted an opportunity to comment, followed by the applicant's response and questions from the commission. Chairperson may limit repetitive debate, reserves the following rights: to limit comment to items on the agenda, to limit public comment to 5 minutes per person, to restrict the number of times a member of public is permitted to speak, and to enact any other reasonable ad hoc protocols or measures necessary to maintain a fair, safe, and orderly meeting. This policy was adopted by the commission to provide for the respectful, constructive, and efficient discussion of business scheduled for consideration and to allow for proper due process as required by law. First item up is the meeting minutes from the December 11th meeting.
Mr. Chair, I would move to approve the minutes from the December 11th, 2023 meeting.
I second the motion.
Questions, comments? Mr. Shaver.
Roll call, Mr. Bernert.
Yes.
Mr. Carter.
Yes.
Ms. Walsh.
Yes.
Mr. Welch.
Yes.
Mr. Leff.
Yes. Motion passes. as
And I'm
well
sorry, I'm
adopted.
trying to do a couple things at once. Can I get the first and the seconds on that?
I made the motion.
First, second.
Second.
Good?
Yep.
All right, time is now 7:02 p.m. And we'll call our first item to order. Daniel Bino requesting approval of the final development plan to renovate and expand an existing structure for a service business to be established on 1.206 acres at 6463 Maxtown Road, Westerville, Ohio, 43082. Currently zoned Planned Commercial District, PCD, also known as Multi-Sound Studios, zoning case number 2023-06. Anyone speaking on behalf this evening for public comment, please rise and be sworn in. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you. Be seated. The following exhibits were either updated or added. Exhibit C, sign-in sheets. Exhibit F, the staff technical review dated January 9th, 2024 for the January 16th meeting. Exhibit G, staff memo dated January 9th, 2024 for January 16th, 2024. H, all public comments received between November 6th, 2023 and January 16th of 2024. And Exhibit I, the revised application and plans received January 3rd of 2023. Mr. Schaefer, floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So as you recall, this is a continued hearing from the December meeting. There's a handful of items that the applicant needed to address. I'm pleased to report that they have addressed all of them. You will see in my development review, one of the comments still showed as open regarding to protecting the landscaping. Jason and I had a discussion today that they do have curbing and parking blocks shown on the plan. Since I was looking at the landscaping plan, when I was checking out the landscaping, I forgot to go back and look at the rest of the site plan to see that, yes, the parking blocks and the curbing is shown there. So that's still outstanding item, pardon me, in the development report is no longer an issue. So I'm just going to touch on real quick on the things they changed, just so you sort of can understand them. Again, regarding landscaping, and let me just scroll to that drawing because it's pretty evident. Just a moment. Let's find it here. There it is. All right. So as you can see, the perimeter of the parking lot will now be surrounded by 24-inch evergreen shrubs to screen it from the street and adjoining properties. Dogwood shrubs will be planted along the interior of the proposed brick wall, which will soften in its appearance. So that's these shrubs. I'm using the cursor to highlight them there. And many of the existing trees on the site are in good condition per the applicant and will be retained. These trees will be supplemented by approximately 9 additional trees throughout the site. Regards to lighting, the solar study drawing that we talked about the last meeting has been pulled from the plan package. It wasn't a requirement, and I imagine trying to get that updated probably just wasn't really worth the effort, and it wasn't going to tell us probably anything more, so there was no need to get a new solar study drawing in there. Regards to signage, the applicant has indicated that they are not proposing any signage at this time, but have reserved the right to install signage in the future with the understanding that it must comply with Section 1803 of the zoning resolution. which is the section that tells you what kind of signs you can put up without needing to pull a zoning permit. Staff finds this approach acceptable as long as the applicant understands that should they desire signage that exceeds the parameters of 1803, a final development plan amendment application would likely have to be submitted and approved by the township unless we incorporate into the plan otherwise. Let's see, one other comment here. The development text has also been revised as requested to reflect the fact that this is a final development plan text and not the preliminary development plan text. Again, as you look through the technical review, comment number 4 in the development review was the only outstanding comment, and per my comments already, that item can now be crossed out. It's been sufficiently addressed. It actually was sufficiently addressed, and I just missed it in the review. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Name, address?
Jason McGee, 389 Electric Avenue, Westerville, designer for Dan Bino. No, I think we've covered everything, and Dan's happy with installing the signage per the, the regulations. I did take a look at that, and that seems sufficient. So we didn't address it, but, he's aware of that. And I think that was the only comment that we didn't address directly in the submission. So, yeah, no additional comments, I guess, from me.
Any public comment? Going once, going twice? Okay. Questions, comments from us?
Not for me.
Okay,
Do you want a motion?
please.
Mr. Chair, I would move to recommend the approval of the following to the Genoa Township Board of Trustees, the subject final development plan application, including all plans and materials submitted by Daniel Bino on approximately 1.206 acres of property located at 6463 Maxtown Road, Westerville, Ohio, 43082, currently zoned Planned Commercial District, PCD, also known as Multi-Sound Studios, zoning commission case number 2023-06, incorporating exhibits A through I and any, actually, there's been no commitments made during this hearing, so it would be a clean motion.
I second the motion.
I was just going to note, there's below item 3, there's an additional statement, sorry.
This motion includes all previously approved divergences as part of the preliminary development plan, which was actually zoning commission case number 2022-07.
I second the revised motion.
Good.
Yep.
Comments, questions, anything?
No.
Roll.
Roll call, Mr. Bernert.
Yes.
Mr. Carter.
Yes.
Ms. Walsh.
Yes.
Mr. Welch.
Yes.
Mr. Leff.
Yes. Motion passes. Close case at 7:08 PM.
Thanks a lot. I appreciate it.
Your work and efforts on that.
Thanks so much.
Appreciate it. All right. You're pulling double duty tonight. So
Yeah,
it's okay.
I'm no Paul Benson. He's got it down to a science.
Paul, when you're listening to this, it's all Joe's fault. so
That's right.
it's okay.
Who knows? He'll probably text me if he is.
You're creating job security for him.
That's right. We need someone around who knows what they're doing. Okay, so the next item on the agenda is the long-anticipated discussion about the draft zoning resolution amendment that I sent out last week. I hope you all received it and were able to open it. There's a lot to unpack here. I'm not exactly sure where to start this, because really, we're at what I see as the first step in a very long process. We haven't initiated the document, we're not holding any public hearings. We're basically just workshopping the draft that I presented to you, and we're gonna just work through it. You tell me what you like, you tell me what you don't like, stuff you want me to do homework on, there's stuff we have all agreed that just needs to be changed, we'll do that. It's basically, anything goes at this point in terms of looking at things, marking up changes, commentary. I will say, while public comment is important, at this stage, because the commission is really just workshopping the document, I think it's most appropriate probably for the dialogue to happen between the commission and staff. Certainly, if the commission wants to solicit comment from the public, that's your right to do so. But I think for efficiency and expediency's sake, it makes more sense for us to have all these discussions because I don't want to get in a huge public debate or dialogue or explanation about something that may ultimately not end up being in the document. So in my opinion, and again, the commission's free to go a different direction, we have these discussions between us, obviously held in public session so everyone can see what we're talking about and understand it. And then once the document gets initiated and the public hearing process starts, that's when we'll go to the public and say, okay, now we are opening the window for formal public comment. We take that in, keeping in mind, you can always change the document after the public comment period if you find things that you want to change. Yes, Mr. Carter?
I was just going to pass on, maybe, we only have two people here tonight. If either one of them wanted to comment, might be.
Yeah, it's, like I said, it's completely up to how the
I don't know if
commission wants
They came
to.
for that reason or not, but just to give them the opportunity at this point. Just a thought.
It's up to you. I mean, it makes more sense before we dive into the conversation if there's
Yeah,
any
that's
preliminary
fine.
comments.
We've got our public comment section, so,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yep.
absolutely, so.
Yeah.
Anybody? Once, twice? Okay.
Just want to make sure we ask in case they come for that reason. You know?
Good idea.
No, it was next on the agenda, but that's okay.
No,
So,
I like to wing it, you know.
We know.
that's okay. That's, again, we're workshopping it, so this is probably gonna, I don't want to say it's informal, but it's not gonna be as structured as the hearings are. So today I prepared sort of a, I think it's 9 bullet point summary. I tried to keep it to 1 page, sort of recapping, or I guess generally summarizing exactly what I'm trying to do with this amendment. I'm not usually a fan of reading to people, so I'm just gonna sort of go through and hit the highlights, and you can read the details in the text form. But I'm gonna go through each bullet point and try to capture the essence of the comments. The first item that we're trying to address is the land use, the whole issue of land uses, how we define them, how do we categorize them, how do we regulate them? Are they conditional uses? Are they not? If they are conditional uses, what are the conditional use standards? What does that all look like? How does that all work? In some places, the code is really specific. Some places it's incredibly vague, and some places it's completely silent. So trying to fix all of that. And this is that was one of the items I know I've mentioned to you before that I've been working on it. It's been a concern of mine for years. It's been sort of a problem for staff for years. And it's also been an item in the comprehensive plan since 2016 we've talked about addressing. It's just, along with several other items I'll get to on this list. It's just been one of those items that's constantly been put on the back burner, or we'll do it later because there's just been more pressing items in business we've been trying to get to on top of the applications. We had to deal with density, the Hoover overlay. We did a couple other omnibus amendments that addressed other issues that were probably more pressing. We had to deal with the signs, thanks to the Supreme Court. So there's just been a lot going on, but now is the time to talk about uses and some of these other things. Second bullet point, since we have new conditional use standards that basically blew up Article 17 and stuff that was there that shouldn't be there, needed to find a new home. So I've relocated all of that text elsewhere. We can get into that in specifics as we go through this conversation. I tried to address several items that have come up either by the Zoning Commission or the Board of Trustees over the past few years. Things like the PRD access points. We've had discussions about sidewalk requirements, lighting in non-planned residential districts, telecommunication tower regulations, the review standards for final development plan extension requests, things like that. Next bullet point, also looking to address numerous code items that staff believes need to be tweaked, improved, corrected, whatever word you want to use. A lot of these items are things that have been challenging for us in administration and enforcement over the years. So we're looking for assistance in trying to modify things to get it working in a way that we need it to work for us in the office. Things like building height definitions and exceptions, outdoor storage and display regulations, language pertaining to noise, sign standards, and landscaping standards for developments, which is, we talked a little bit about that with this last application. And And noise reminds me, some of it is making it clear on exactly what we can and can't do and when we can and can't do something. Noise has come up a couple times in some of the recent hearings. We've had very long discussions about what we can and can't do about noise and where those authorities ultimately lie as a result of the revised code. So trying to address the concern, but stay within the bounds of the sandbox that we get to play in under the law. Establishing code regulations for topics the resolution was weak or silent on. Examples are cluster mailbox units, electrical vehicle chargers, solar facilities, and again, improving definitions that are just not sufficient, dated, vague, what have you. We're also looking at simplifying parking regulations, especially in regards to the number of minimum parking spaces required to better coincide with revisions to the land use regulations that are being proposed, and keep them more in line with the direction many communities are moving in regards to parking to reduce the number of needless parking spaces, and by extension, reduce the amount of pavement needed for such lots. There's, in the planner nerd sort of sphere, there's a website called Strong Towns, and this guy's actually a former engineer, civil engineer, and one of his things is on Black Friday, he has people go out and just lay out in these fields of parking that have been totally overbuilt to show like how ridiculously overparked a lot of the country is. I can't say we have that huge problem here. I think our parking is fairly, reasonable, but you saw like Kroger had a huge parking lot and they infilled it with that building with Tide and stuff, and you may have to park a little bit farther out for your groceries, and yeah, maybe on days leading up to Christmas or Thanksgiving it gets a little hairy, but by and large, I'm not seeing cars parking on the grass or queuing up in the parking aisles at Kroger. It seems to be functioning well. So if it works there, maybe we need to reevaluate how we're addressing it. And also making it a little more flexible and not having parking standards for each individual use, and maybe zooming out a little bit and trying to be a little more common sense about it. Also looking at just reorganizing and reformatting the document and the orders of the sections in each zoning district, so the order in which items appear is consistent across district types. So if you look at it, in some of the districts, principal use is here, but then in another district it's over here. It jumps all over the place. It's not consistent. It's a result of the code being amended so many times over the years and new districts being added and everyone sort of doing it their own way and never being consistent about it. Admittedly, some of it is just my own compulsion to get it all in order, but I do think it makes the document flow better. And it was also an opportunity to move things around into more sensible locations and provide for that consistency and predictability that's really important when we're trying to administer and help people understand the document. Also look at rearranging and revising text to provide better, more logical flow and structure. That's sort of similar to what I was just talking about. Also improves transparency, clarifies the delegation of certain duties. We've got intents and purpose sections now for each one of the major articles in the code. And again, a lot of these items I just went through, I've sort of remiss to mention, have been items we've talked about doing, and they're actually listed in the comprehensive plan as items we should do in the zoning code. That included the rearranging of code sections, the reorganization of things, the parking changes we talked about, updating definitions. Yeah, those were all items, and like I said, land use, those were all items. You can look in the comp plan in chapter 5, you'll see that we talked about way back in even 2016 that we wanted to get to. So we're finally getting to them. We crossed out a lot of things on those lists, but there was still some remaining. Hopefully we will cross out the rest, most if not all of them, if we move forward with these changes. So that's the overarching view of exactly what I'm trying to do here. I guess, Mr. Chairman, how would you like the commissioner or myself to proceed through the document? We can go page by page, we can go article by article. If there's certain topics you want me to jump to that you want to see first, then we can hop around. I'm sort of leaving it up to the commission on how you want to work through this. I know it's a lot to digest, but we got to start somewhere.
Does anybody have a request at this point?
I think a good starting point is that table. Is that the table, the 505 or something?
Yeah, Article 5, yep.
I think the table is a big talking point because it will define how the document is established further. Because now a lot of stuff is gotten rid of each zoning district, and it's put into the table. And I'm just for me, I think the table might not be the ideal way to go about and just erasing everything from like the zoning districts, like what the uses were in rural residential, the principal uses. Now everything is in that table. You're in the article of rural residential. You need to go to a table now to figure out what the use is, and then you need to go back to another section to see what that use actually, what the requirements of this use is, what you can do in another section. So it's a little bit hopping from one article to another. And I think in the beginning, it was more like rural residential, and there was everything in rural residential. I mean, there's one article that would be referred to still for more requirements, but most of it was in that section of the zoning district. And I just wonder if the table doesn't complicate everything needlessly. I mean, I don't think the table per se is a bad thing, but it might be better as an addition to just getting rid of everything in the per zoning district.
Well, I try to look at it from who's reading it. And, you know, for the people who do it a lot, you know, we can probably figure it out. But for a resident who wants to do it, when I looked at the tables versus the area, like rural residential, if you live in rural residential and you go, what can I or can't I do? You can look right there. But if you're somebody who wants to know, I want to build a microbrewery, can I build it in rural residential, PCD, you know, all this stuff, you might look in there. So my suggestion, kind of along those lines, would be, let's keep the tables, but let's keep the stuff in the areas. Because it is really hard to, I was going through the tables, and you have to remember what R and S are, and you have to go back up the top, and I just found it cumbersome, and because we do have to cover everything. Like, nobody's gonna build a landing strip in Genoa Township, but it's in there. Probably nobody's gonna put in.
Believe it or not, I've had someone ask.
Okay. They're not gonna put in a stadium and all that, but I understand we have to cover every eventuality, because somebody may come up with it.
It was actually a helicopter pad, I think, but
Yeah.
same difference.
But I'm just, I found
Somebody
that,
just built a football field in their yard, so.
yeah. And so I think it's kind of like, you know, nowadays we have, you know, search engines and stuff like this. This gives people two different ways to look at it. I don't think it's a big problem to leave the information in the areas. Because the one thing I was looking up, I remember, but in the table, you end up having to refer back to it anyway. So you're kind of like, you're going back and forth a lot, and that's the only thing. However, it would be beneficial to somebody who had a very unique interest, who doesn't want to look through rural residential PRD and SR and all that stuff to say, where can I build this? It's pretty straightforward because, you know, there's industrial areas and business areas and there's residential areas. So I would suggest keeping both.
Well, I think what you hit on is, even from a higher perspective, is I have a piece of property, what can I do with my piece of property, versus I have this project, where can I stick this project?
Right, and
So there's two ways of looking.
the table helps with one, and
Yeah.
having it within the area is the other, was my.
Right.
And that's the challenge. I don't want people having to bounce all around the document, but you're right, we do have, I get calls all the time from people coming from both different ends of that spectrum. So it's about, I guess, picking one or trying to find a hybrid model that we think is gonna work best that achieves both of those ends. I can tell you the only thing about if you repeat it in multiple places, the biggest risk we find with that historically has been when you go to amend the code, remembering to change it in every one of those areas. We have found in areas where, I don't know if I did it or not, but I know we've seen in the past, it doesn't really matter who did it, where things have been changed and we realized it got changed in one district but not the other, and it should have been. So, and that can sometimes come back and bite us a little bit, depending on the project. So just something to be mindful of. Also, by repeating stuff, this document, now it won't be 414 pages when we accept all the changes and deletions, but my guess is we're still at over 300 pages even with all the changes and deletions. That's significantly larger than the document is now, I'm not gonna lie. Now, a lot of it is stuff that people probably are never gonna use, but it's stuff I think we need to have in there to protect the township's interest and anticipate the future. So again, there's that balancing act too of it's nice to have a short, concise document, but to the same degree, if it's short and concise, it probably has loopholes and probably is not gonna be as thorough or prescriptive as you need it to be, but to the same degree, you don't wanna create something that's, you know, ginormously big. So, like I said, whatever direction the commission wants to go, I'm just throwing that as food for thought as you have your discussion.
I mean, that's just my point is, I think both would be okay. You did all the work for that, and it does cover a huge variety of things. And then that way it's covered in 2 places. If you, and, you know, I know between you and Paul, you can probably figure it out. I don't know if there's search engines now, you can find out where all those things are or whatever. But, I mean, even though it's a little more complicated, I don't think that's an issue.
Sure. And I know there's communities that do it that way, so that's, I mean, obviously, we did it that way in a little bit different format. I think if we were gonna go down that route, I'd probably sketch out the framework for it and insert it, but I probably wouldn't completely fill it out until we got closer to the end and said, yeah, we know these are the uses we want, we know these are the Ns or the Rs or the Cs in the table. That way, because I don't wanna have to do all that work and then we change a use or change how something works, and now I've gotta do it in 12 different
But the
areas.
table itself is helpful. So I
Yeah.
appreciate that work, but I would not eliminate it out of the other areas.
Yeah, that makes sense. I understand.
Something else on the table. So you have 2 tables. There's a table of principal use and a table for accessory use. Like, why can we not combine it? There's just one extra letter you need to add to this table with an A for accessory use, and then you maybe have 2 letters sometimes, but it would make so much pages go away.
From a staff standpoint, it's really important that we distinguish principal from accessory, because it really tells us
But the
which
extension would
restrictions
be-
apply.
The extension would be a letter, like it's still a legend, because now you have so much extra table with the same conditions in, the same options in for uses that it's just a repetition of itself.
Well, some of it is, but some of it isn't. There's stuff in the principal use table that doesn't appear in the accessory use table, and I think it might be vice versa as well. So that's why they're separated, because from a regulatory standpoint, they're so substantially different. They're different definitions, there's different regulations that can apply to them. You know, a garage that's attached to your house is part of the principal structure, so it's part of the principal use, but if it's detached, now it's an accessory structure, and there's a whole different section of the code that applies. So I'm weary on muddying those waters. The current code very much makes a distinction between the two. They're in 2 different sections. I'm inclined to recommend that we keep with that theme. Although I understand the concern, but I think it is important in this aspect that we probably keep the accessory and principal distinctions. Those are pretty,
Another
Essential.
thing is, like, the Hoover overlay district, like, I erased that out of the whole table because I've looked through the whole Hoover overlay district, there's not really any information that you necessarily need out of that table. You can just use the zoning district.
in terms of the uses.
Yeah.
Yeah, there were a handful where I went out of my way to specifically say, no, we're not going with the underlying zoning district. We're just flat out saying no to these. As I felt like they just weren't uses that I thought were conducive to,
But that's kind
That
of for
overlay.
everything, it's the underlying zoning district, right?
But were you saying the Hoover overlay made it more restrictive than the underlying?
yes.
Okay.
Yeah, there's certain uses we would permit in the underlying district if it's not in the overlay, but
And
we
that
would
be
not want in
for-
the overlay.
For usages also, you were saying?
But, yeah, for the users, like either a principal or.
Actually, here's a whole bunch of them.
accessory.
Yeah.
Yeah, a couple, yeah. It's very limited.
Actually, some of these might need to defer to the underlying zoning district, so that's something we need to look at.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't hurt to leave it in. I mean,
So just look, if you can scroll back down to winery,
Mm-hmm.
that caught my eye. We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
That's how they get defined. I looked at in the industry. I had no idea either until I looked it up. I mean, we could just say micro wineries and we don't care whether or not it has a tap room or not. I mean, those are areas where we can consolidate. If you feel like there isn't a huge distinction.
That's gonna matter based on if they get a liquor license or not.
Mhm.
If they have
Yeah.
a tap room, they're gonna have a liquor license. If they don't, then that's different.
Correct.
So then you've got to worry about parking and other things.
Yeah, and I think that's why I called them out, because now you're talking about people coming onto the premise, again, serving liquor on the premise. That's why I kept them separate, but if we're okay with not distinguishing between those items, then we can consolidate them. And there might be opportunities like that. There probably is. Wineries, breweries, and distilleries very much get in the weeds.
It looks like there are differences in the different breweries. Some have Rs, some have Ss, and some have Ns, if I can see that correctly. I don't know why, but
Yeah, when I was doing the research, it's all about the volume, like macro and micro is all about the volume that gets produced at these places. And I didn't make up any of these numbers. This was all based on like industry standards I found. So when you go on the definitions, like, where'd you come up with this for this? This is all, I didn't make it up. It was all just industry standards I found, and these were the terms that they were using.
Let me ask a different question, because I have a client, I'm being exposed to Berkshire's zoning code. And they go by the NCAI.
Oh, the NAICS codes, yeah.
Yeah.
I thought about the NAICS code. I'm assuming the question is,
Yeah.
is that something we should
What's
consider?
your thoughts and?
The NAICS codes, number one, they get even more hyper-specific than this,
They do.
depending on how far out you want to go with the numbers. To a degree that even I found like, no, this is too much. We don't need to go to this level of detail. The other issue with NAICS is you are really not controlling then the definitions at that point. You are now relying on NAICS to define what that use is for you.
Right.
And the definition that works for NAICS and their purposes may not always be great for zoning purposes. So it's a control issue for me, I guess. I'll admit it. I want to retain that control. I don't want just NAICS to dictate it. Now, did I look at NAICS for some of these use classification ideas and some of the definitions? Absolutely. It was one of my resources. I just don't want to be beholden to NAICS and have no ability to change it. Because then if they change something or their whole classification system blows up, now we've got to blow everything up. I know there's a lot of communities that use it, works for them. I just never been a fan of incorporating it into the zoning code.
I mean, I also saw you already changed a few of these principal uses too. Like if you go to the top of section 505, the start of the table,
Mm-hmm.
like I know by fact, like farm markets, that there definitely were a principal use in rural residential, and that's like already not the case anymore. And there's multiple things that already are changed that were in the old code different. Which, and PRD can have a farm market. I mean, some of these things make no sense to me.
And that's what the little asterisk is for, is because it was hard to account for all the exemptions that may exist in the revised code, especially in regards to ag and some of the other things. So that's why we have this asterisk of saying, we're not gonna allow a farm market if it's not ag exempt. Because essentially you're just opening an outdoor retail operation or an indoor retail operation, essentially, to some degree. I'm trying to eliminate loopholes there by saying we don't want that. If it's not ag exempt, we don't want it necessarily what could be a retail operation there. But if it is ag exempt, we understand you have certain rights, and if you fall within those exemptions, obviously we're gonna allow it. So, but again, some of it is, I don't wanna accidentally create a loophole, which is why it's like, well, if it's exempt, then you don't even need it in here. Yeah, but what if it's some weird scenario? And I say that, and sometimes I think people think I'm overthinking it, but every day we get presented with stuff where like, we never thought of that in that office. So it's just about, what if someone presents something and it doesn't really meet the definition of retail, but it's not really ag exempt, a farm market, so it's sort of a farm market. Like, you want to say, okay, listen, if you're calling yourself a farm market, if you're not ag exempt, you're out. That kind of thing. And again, these letters can change. If we feel like, yeah, we're okay with a non-exempt farm market in RR, you can change that N to R. I mean, if that's what we all agree on.
Did you say that they have been changed from what they used
Well,
to be?
beforehand, farm market was one of the uses, the principal uses that was allowed in rural residential.
But it's not now, is that what you're saying?
Well, yeah, there's just
According
some
to
of
Joe.
these things that have been changed,
I'm
so.
just curious, Joe,
I tried to maintain consistency unless I really felt like it was something that needed change. So it says farm markets is regulated by 1716. So that basically meant farm markets as exempted by the revised code, because 1716 was all the language that talks about the revised code exemption. So we're sort of presenting it in the same thing, just in a different way. Because basically, if you go to 1716, then talks about farm markets. And I'm using the hard copy book because it's all deleted in here. It'll be hard to read on the screen. It talks about farm markets that derive at least 50% of their gross income from any produce raised on farms owned or operated by the farm market operator in a normal crop year are permitted in any zoning district subject to the following regulations. And thanks to the revised code, it's obscenely complicated. So I'm not going to, and lengthy, so I'm not going to read through all of it. But it basically says you can only do a farm market in that zoning district if you meet all those parameters that the state sets forth. Which is basically what we're saying here, is if it's not allowed unless you meet the state's exemption requirements, in which case you are allowed.
I know, but in a PRD, they're gonna farm their own food and sell it? I mean, that seems so weird.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things we could, it says it's set forth in the final development plan, so that's an important thing to remember. You would see that. If some developer came in and said, we have this grand open space idea, and we want to incorporate this little community farm market. We think it's a niche, not something you have in Central Ohio. What do you think? We'd say, well, the code says it's a use by right, and if the commission feels like the plan is right and you like how it's all working, yeah, it's going to be allowed if we approve it as part of the final development plan. We wouldn't necessarily say no, as long as we're happy with the development plan. So that's how I envision that working. We already have a little bit of that concept, not necessarily with farm markets, but with the agriculture stuff in there already. In one of these, we had a former trustee who always was telling me about, there was this development in like Arizona, and they called it Agritopia, and that's its whole thing it was like this residential development, but at its heart, it had like this whole agricultural thing going on. So I could see someone trying to do something like that, especially, in all these communities are about rural character and farming and the heritage and stuff. I could see a developer coming in and trying to say, all right, well, we'll give you this big working farm in the middle of the development and we'll surround it with houses. So again, I'm trying to stay a step ahead here of things that we might see and anticipate things.
There's one of those in New Albany.
But-
Big old horse barn right in the middle of an entire community.
Oh, yeah, I forgot about that one.
Yeah.
But
So, I mean, if we're not comfortable seeing that, then we change it. That's why we're here.
I didn't think about that. So are we looking to decide how to approach this? Is that what the discussion on the table is?
Yeah,
I mean, you don't need to make any decisions tonight. I mean, this is just,
well. I think
Opening
we-
discussion,
We need to
obviously.
come up with a plan for the next meeting because we have some homework to do
yes.
as to what direction we want to go. My preference off the top is to start at the beginning and work our way through. But if we feel very strongly about starting somewhere else in this document, say now.
I agree with you. I also want to start in the beginning. The only reason I brought this up is because this does dictate later passages, and if we make
Yes.
a decision about it, he needs to make changes on it.
I absolutely agree with that. If this is tied to a lot of other things, you're right. So if we don't like this, it's
Can
gonna
you go to the table?
change a lot of things.
Can you go up to the table of contents, please?
Yes. And I will say, on the PRD front, just to sort of wrap up that conversation, there are certain uses that I'm proposing to be allowed in those PRDs that we historically have not allowed, but again, under the theory that they'd be part of a final development plan, and the commission is gonna see them and have to authorize them.
And I know we're gonna have this discussion, there were a couple of things we talked about, distance between houses and a PRD, getting rid of the sprinklers in houses, I think, in the PRD section. It was 29, 30, and then you put something about 60 or something in there.
Yes.
There are a couple of things that, I don't know if we want to wait 6 months to change, in case we get another, remember those 4 things I gave you last meeting we talked about?
Yeah. I did look at all those items. I think I did 3 out of the 4. The setback thing I felt like was a commission discussion. Candidly, staff wasn't sure if we felt like there would needed to be a change there because of the fire code regulates it. And one of the benefits of doing conservation development is those closer setbacks. So I feel like I don't want to upset that balance too much. So just wasn't a change that I was sure that I was 100% behind, to be honest. But again, if that's what the commission wants, that's what
And
staff
I
will
didn't
do.
mean to throw us off track, but there was the also final development plan, 3-year mark.
Yes, that's in there.
That's in there now?
Yeah. I can jump to it if you want, but yeah,
That's
I
fine.
absolutely covered
Well, I
that.
just was gonna, my only point was, there's a couple things that maybe we want to get done now before somebody else comes in and submits a plan, and we don't have down what we wanted. I don't know, we didn't really talk about the distance, but in PRD, under conservation, there's 0 requirement for space between houses. I think we've done 12 feet, sort of, because of the fire department.
Yeah, the fire department won't allow anything less than that unless there's firewalls and stuff that get
Yeah,
built.
so we kind of talked about that. I don't know if you want to talk about that now, it's up to you.
So your question is basically.
No, but no matter what, if we were to go down that road, we're 6 months before we even touch this again.
Right.
Because we'd have to initiate, we'd have to have hearings, we'd have to go, we're not gonna have
True.
two working things at the same time.
Yeah,
It would then have to go to the trustees.
true, that makes it cumbersome. You're right,
Yes.
absolutely.
So
Yeah.
then now we're pushing pause on at least 6 months for everything.
Okay,
So I would,
okay. Okay. I just wanted to throw those out there. But no, I think go ahead and start from the beginning and hopefully we can work through this. I don't think it's going to be too hard. A lot of this is legal stuff and, it's pretty easy, I hope.
Yeah, I will say, I haven't had any of the attorneys look at this yet, so there's definitely gonna be stuff we're gonna have to run by them. I'll also ask probably for a formal review by the prosecutor's office and possibly even asking Brochus Johnson and Grace to look at it. I'm sure it'll cost us some money, but wanna do it once, do it right kind of thing. So, that's my thought process
I just
there.
wanted to toss that out there, but let's go ahead and go start at the beginning.
Have you talked to Marshall Cato as to, I mean, I have my opinion about the 2 access points in a PRD, but, I mean,
We talked about it when that plan came through,
but I mean,
in terms of the number of houses.
no, in terms of, does the fire department have any thoughts or input about road design, road access, or streets,
Oh,
or separation distances, or the access points? I mean,
so,
to your point, I agree. I think there should always be 2, regardless of whether or not the houses are sprinkled. But that, I'm not the fire department. I don't want to speak for the fire department. I mean,
no, I don't think they're in favor of one if, I mean, they have to honor the fire code, but I think if they had their druthers, they would also have to, based on the prior conversations I've had with them.
Well, but I think if there's anything else they would like to see
On that front.
on any front. with
Oh, okay.
respect-
Yeah,
mean,
I can talk to
realize
so the distance issue between the entrances must exceed a certain linear distance as well.
I will say the threshold I have in there is, I got that from the county engineer's office.
Which is-
I asked him what that minimum distance separation requirement was.
Do you remember what it is?
I think it's 600 feet.
Do they have 600 feet frontage on Big Walnut?
For Big Walnut, or,
Are we talking about Big Walnut?
well, I don't know, in general.
Anywhere.
In general.
In general, I mean, in general, but I was, specifically, that was the last one we talked about.
Yeah, I don't know about that specific lot. I
But
don't
that's
remember
the
what its frontage
requirement,
was,
okay.
but, that was, I emailed the engineer and asked him that, of what would the minimum separation requirement be on 2 public streets, and that's the number they gave me. So that's the number I used.
I mean, honestly, I didn't, when I was fire chief down south, I didn't try and reinvent the wheel. I said, your turning radiuses and everything have to meet ODOT specifications and things like that,
And that's what they would have to do. If it's a public street, they have to meet the county's public street design standards. And I know the fire marshal looks at it for the turning radii. I mean, I think a lot of the engineer's requirements are consistent with what the fire departments are looking for these days, but I know Marshall Cato, it's something he looks at. He wants to make sure they can get in and out, and especially on the non-residential developments. The public streets for most of the residential neighborhoods usually isn't much of an issue. Sometimes when you get into the private street design, it gets a little more hairy because they're not necessarily always having to meet the public street design standards, but I think a lot of them these days essentially are because there's just that expectation amongst the customer base, number one. And number two, a lot of the township are sort of pushing back and saying, we have neighborhoods that had private streets, and now they're asking us to take them over. And we don't want to be accepting streets that don't meet public standards. So I think for that reason too, some of the developers are looking at building private streets up to public standard in case they ever do need to go public. And I think the engineer's office is also sort of pushing for that now too.
How much are you thinking that we should take on?
I want to go back to table of contents as soon as he's.
Yep. I'll go right back up there. All right. Oh, this is just the intro resolution. Most of it's just changing dates. Should we take action, those dates will get filled in. All right, here we go.
I mean,
Table of
initially,
contents, everything changed, didn't it? Is that what the dark If there's
Yeah,
changes
so
in it?
basically, the Word document is set up to just update that anytime those section numbers or titles changes. The numbers on the right will get changed when we get to like the final draft, because if you look in the code right now, it'll say like, instead of page 1, it'll say page 1-1. But I have to hand type all of that in until I can figure out a smarter way to do it. So I'm just not doing it until we get to the end.
I'm good with the table of contents, yeah.
Well, I'm just thinking if we do 1 through 5 is our assignment for next, we work through 1 through 5 to start off with.
5 includes that table.
5
I'm-
includes the table.
Yeah, and that's a lot.
It's a lot.
That's
So I
good,
think one
that is a
through-
good point.
Because
The
that's,
definitions is a lot too.
definitions is huge.
And
and table's
the
gonna be huge.
definitions and the table go somewhat hand in hand
Right.
too.
So if we just do 1 through 5 for the next meeting, see how far we get, and then we decide from there on, and if we go, because it looks like it almost will mirror this. Because then we can go 6 through,
Yeah, a lot of the zoning district changes are gonna be similar by type. You know, the straight residential districts are gonna read the same, just with different numbers. Same for the plain districts.
so if we do that, if we go 1 through 5, and then the next one, we would go 6 through 14, which would cover all the major districts, or 15, if we do light industrial.
Mhm.
Then we get into specials and general development standards and the other things, so 3 to 4 meetings to get through the list.
But, yeah, I think it's really-
That's fine with me.
Okay, so our assignment is to read 1 through 5, mark it up, comment, questions, whatever we're gonna do, and we'll go page by page at this point.
I do want to bring up one more thing.
Okay.
This is just more like a general comment, I guess. So there was like a project that went to BZA that was in the light industrial district, I think, because it was the storage facility. I'm just wondering if we as a zoning commission should make all districts planned districts, because a planned district will make it that it needs to come in front of us. That's correct, right?
Yes.
Because everything that, basically there was a big storage project that went to BZA. I'm not gonna say anything about the project itself, but it went to BZA because it's not a planned district, but it was a whole new project. And then we don't have anything to say about it, the zoning commission, and because we don't have anything to say about it, the trustees will also have nothing to say about it. So no one elected will ever say anything about any of these projects. And I just thought it might be a good idea to make more things, put some of these things in a planned district, move them instead of letting them be just the light industrial district and the community business district.
Yeah. The challenge we have there, and in some ways, I don't disagree with you. But in some ways, there is a benefit to the street district. So it all depends on what your end goal is. If you want to see absolutely everything, then yeah, the more stuff in the planned districts, the better, because it's coming in front of you. If you're trying to incentivize certain economic development, going through the straight districts, as long as you have certain guardrails in place, sometimes makes more sense because it can expedite the process on the development end. Again, different communities are looking for different things. Some communities are very much in certain, and it can vary by corridor and area you're talking about. Some areas you may want to see, but in other areas you're like, no, we need to fast track development. And you see that in a lot of communities that are either looking to grow fast or looking to revitalize. They're trying to knock down, cut red tape and eliminate those barriers. Whereas some communities are looking to go the opposite direction. They want to make sure they have a lot of control over it. So some of it is, again, dependent on what you're trying to do in any given area. There's also the tactic of, you could always incentivize the planned districts or basically push people to the planned districts without deleting the straight districts. How do you do that? You basically put the carrots out there and make life a lot easier in a planned district. Yeah, you have to go in front of the commission, but you get a lot more flexibility in terms of setbacks or open space or whatever item we come up with. You also can incentivize it by saying, we're only going to allow a very small number of uses in the light industrial district. If you want that use, you've got to ask for planned industrial, and you got to get a development plan. You can push them that way. Those are the tactics I tend to like to use. Also, I'm not sure we can delete the straight districts entirely, because you can't force someone into a planned district. You can't rezone someone. The commission cannot, and the township cannot rezone a property into a planned district. The revised code says a planned district can only be applied when the property owner, their representative, with their authorization, applies for it. So we can't get rid of the straight districts because we have nothing to zone them to. They're sort of vestigial, and we're sort of stuck with them until the point where all the light industrial and community business districts get rezoned to plan districts, at which point then, yeah, we could get rid of it if we didn't have any more of those districts. But right now, I feel like we're sort of having to be stuck with them. Now, again, can we incentivize, rework the code to making sure that hopefully we push those people into light districts? Yes, like one of the things is on self-storage warehouses, maybe we say they're not allowed in the light industrial district anymore. What's there is what's there, but now if you want to do one, it's got to be in a PID, which means you got to come in front of us. So
I mean,
there's ways to work that.
because I know Westerville has it like rural residential is not really zoning anymore. Everything that's now rural residential is kind of pushed towards another zoning district. Like rural residential, you can barely do anything there anymore.
Mhm.
It's what is there now is there now. But from the moment you want to move to do something else on that property, you're going to have to go to another zoning. And I just think because our township, I mean, we have only like a little bit of these properties, and even like commercial business, how many properties are there?
Yeah.
5 maybe?
I think it's 2.
Yeah, or 2.
maybe
It's
it's five.
ridiculously
It's not a
low
lot.
amounts. That maybe it would be just better to start moving more to a planned district, because in the long run, someone might buy one of these properties and do something big there, and then the commission or the trustees will have nothing to say about it. And I just think it's better for our township that there has that there is public, well, there would be public comment at the BZA, but there would not be any elected call on decision on
Correct.
it.
So one of the things I did try to do here on some of those uses that are allowed via conditional use in the straight districts, but are also allowed in the plan districts, is I basically tried to point, no matter what route you were going, you still had to follow the same standards. So like, you could say, here's the standards for self-storage units. It's allowed in light industrial district, and then you got to go through the conditional use process and the BZA. If the property's on PID and you want to do it, guess what? You have to go in front of the zoning commission, the trustees, and by the way, you have to use the exact same standards that would have applied if you were under the light industrial district. So there's that tactic too of basically saying, we point to the same regulation, the route in which we get there and which board you're in front of. Do you lose well, you got to remember, on a application of a final development plan to a plan district, with the way the code is set up, especially for the industrial district functions in overlays. So any improvement of a development plan in the PID is going to be in an administrative hearing. It's not going to be subject to referendum anyway. The only time you're subject to referendum is like when we rezone the property PRD, and I think the PCD still operates as a traditional rezoning in the 2-step process. But the PID is always a 1-step process. In fact, we are going to live that out with the application that's on your February agenda. So again, that's important to keep in mind too of how that all functions. So some of it is statute, some of it is just how we set things up to function. Trust me, I could go the Orange Township route and basically drop the whole code in the trash can and say we're just starting over and we could invent new zoning districts. Trust me, the planner and me would love to do it. I feel like actually some of the districts we have are not flexible enough. They don't account for transitional areas, they don't account for corridors. If we really wanted to go down a route, we could. It's gonna take a lot longer to do. So I wasn't ready to push that far with it yet. So I tried to push as far as I could without feeling like I was gonna go overboard with what we were doing. But yeah, if we wanna do new districts, again, I'm not sure we can delete a district unless you were replacing it with something else, and it can't be a planned district.
Well, you can just try to force them to the planned district that are already there. I mean, there's a planned industrial district, so.
Yeah, you can incentivize it, but we just can't delete the light industrial district out of the code because there's
Well, I mean,
properties in that district.
Whoever is there now, I get that, but for the future, if someone else wants to do that or something.
Yeah, and that's why, I think we're sort of saying the same thing. I think we're talking about incentivizing people to go that planned district route, and I agree with you.
Indeed.
I agree with, your setup, 1 through 5, 6 through all that, I completely agree with that. This is sort of the same thing. This place right across the way, the Olive Branch.
Yeah.
Is that a commercial? What's the name of that?
Yeah, so that's a very unique piece of property. That property is zoned planned commercial district, but it has no final development plan
What
that,
kind of commercial, I'm sorry.
planned commercial,
It's planned.
Land commercial. Land commercial, okay, PCD, okay, gotcha.
PCD. But it has no final development plan that anyone is aware of on staff, and we find nothing in the records. The best we can surmise is, and unfortunately some of the records have been lost to time, so in 1987, and here's a little bit of zoning history, so please don't fall asleep. So from 1950-something till 1987, Genoa Township had two zoning codes, two zoning resolutions, believe it or not. One for east of Tussock, one for west of Tussock. I think east of Tussock came first, basically because the reservoir was getting built, and they thought it was going to promote development east of Tussock, so they felt like they needed to regulate it in zoning. But the people west of Tussock said, well, we're not like the people east of Tussock, and we don't have the reservoir, so A, they didn't have zoning there to begin with, and then a few years later, like, yeah, we're going to do zoning, but it's going to function differently. We had two different zoning resolutions for different halves of the township for 30 years. In 1987, they said, that's ridiculous, we are going to put them all together under one zoning code. When they did that, they had to decide, they had to basically rezone the entire township because they had two different conflicting codes. When they did that, that property got put in the planned commercial district. I'm assuming with the property owner's permission per the revised code statute. No one's questioned it otherwise. So it's been like that since the 80s.
My question is, what are they required to do? Do they have to come? from the
Yeah, that's
zoning
where I'm
commission?
getting. So that's where I'm getting to. Because normally, if someone was wanting PCD, they'd have to go through the two-step process, rezone to PC, like we just had with multi-sound. They went through the PCD rezoning process, and now they're back for step 2 for the final development plan. Since that property is already PCD, step 1 we're assuming is done and is valid. So we're going ahead, and they're going to have to go with step 2, which is submit a final development plan that'll have to come in front of the commission. The only caveat to that is if they find if they propose something that finds some sort of loophole where they wouldn't have to. I can't imagine that scenario happening because I basically have told everyone I am not issuing a zoning permit for any construction out there or anything new because there's no plan. It's a plan district without a plan. So get a plan and then we'll issue your zoning permit. But if attorneys get involved and there's, I just can never say never. But my intention is to make them get a final development plan and come from front of you.
So there is no plan on file.
Mm-mm. That building, that front building they tore down was, I believe, I think it was relocated here from over the old Village of Africa. I think it was like an original gas station, like, when cars were first invented, gas station. And people pulled up and the pumps were outside and that was just the little shack that was next to the pumps. It got I believe, if I've read correctly, that it got relocated here when, I have no idea. And for years it was a general store. Susan on staff can remember biking to it when it was a little general store, bait shop kind of thing. And then, eventually it converted over to a lawn repair business that then sold to the lawn repair business that was currently there, and now it is cleared. So that's sort of the general history there. And, while it was a historic building, in a sense, the interior of it was not in good shape. It was, the fire marshal had a lot of things to say about the conditions of that building and how safe that building was. So, and with its proximity to that intersection and the roundabout coming in, I'm sure the property owners thought it was probably just, by evidence of the demolition, they probably figured out that it was just going to make more sense to clear it out and start anew.
We're going to talk about definitions, is that chapter 4?
Yes.
Is there any, I don't know if you can do this or not. A lot of times in a glossary, you'll go back and you're looking for a word and it'll say, well, it's in chapters 4, 7, 6, and 13. I imagine that would be a humongous project for you guys for the definitions to kind of say where they're located, because sometimes I go, okay, what the heck is that? Where is that in the code? And I have no way of really finding it without just
Yeah.
Adobe.
Go to find. It'll find every single location of it.
I'm sure someone really good with
Okay.
Word can create a glossary without a lot of effort. But to Mr. Left's point, that's usually what I do is Control F, type in the word that you're looking for, and the computer is going very slow, but,
Where it is,
um,
sentence that is already.
or if you're working the Word document, Word has that
Word
function.
has a file, yes.
No, okay, thank you.
So, yeah, I don't know why it's reacting so slow, but if I could spell, that would also help. Yeah, I don't know, but yes, yeah, I promise you it works. It's the computer's being difficult. but
Use it often.
I do too.
Okay, 1 through 5 by
1 through
February
5
12th.
for our next meeting.
In the meantime, if you have any questions, comments, there's something you think we ought to consider. Even as of this late last week, I thought of something, I was like, well, maybe this should be in there, so I drafted it up in a separate document in case we want to throw it in. So I'm not going to promise there isn't going to be anything that comes up over the course of this review that might pop up that I might want to add in there. as we continue to administer things, but I'll try to keep that to a minimum so we can eventually get this process done.
You want to make any comments about this?
Oh, yeah, in front of you, that big packet. So that's an application for the last, I believe it's the last vacant parcel on Northgate Center behind Goodwill. They actually applied last fall, and then right after they submitted, they said, oh, we just got a tenant signed on, and we need to change the plan, so we don't even want to be heard yet. So that's why I didn't bring in front of you even for a continuance, because they were not even ready to start, and the legal description would not have matched what they ended up proposing. So Mr. Leff and I had a discussion, we tabled it, or we just sort of informally tabled it at staff level and have been sitting on it, so they just got us their updated plans today, and that's what you have in front of you. That application will be on your agenda for February. Essentially, it's just 2 buildings. This site has some history. When Goodwill came through, they sort of master planned the site, and so they did anticipate, I think it may have been 3 buildings actually when Goodwill came through. So they master planned this a little bit and knew that they were going to do something back there, but it was always sort of a, yeah, we'll get around to it eventually. Well, apparently it's now eventually, so that's what they're coming through. A final development plan to allow them to construct 2 buildings back there.
And remind this, it was not submitted before any other adoption, right? So we're on the clean version.
No, last code amendments we approved went effect back in May, so they applied under the current
After
code,
the
so,
current.
yeah.
Okay, so we're not worrying about past versions and other
Nope,
stuff. again
nope,
on
nope,
this.
nope, nope.
You got anything else? Comments? Anything?
Trying to think, the board reorganized last week. Applications for appointment or reappointment to the various boards and committees of the township, I think are due by the end of this week. So if you're interested in, I guess, leaving me and going to a different board, you could always
They
do
were
that.
already due. I think I thought they were due this week.
Oh, were they, was it this, was it
Sunday.
today?
I think they were due the 15th,
Oh,
by,
15th, I'm sorry.
before the 15th or by
For
the
the 15th,
15th.
19th might have been last year's date.
Mhm.
So,
Who's up?
I am. No.
and we have an alternate position, at least Mr. Sears' his term's up. So, you know, I'll get shot out probably the list of names here in the next couple of days of who applied for what boards and start to understand. And the board will probably meet in February and decide how they're going to proceed with interviewing people and what their appointment process is going to look like. They tend to change it a little bit year by year depending on what sort of they're looking at, so. But hopefully we'll know by the end of March, so come April 1st, we'll be able to have the new board, whatever the makeup is, new board, old board, current board, I don't know, sitting. Whatever the board decides, that's up to them.
Anybody got anything else?
I'm good.
You got a motion?
Mr. Chair, I would move to adjourn this meeting.
I will second the motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Meeting is over, 8:03 PM.